She was 25 years old, and she had $340 folded inside a sandwich bag, a burner phone with one number saved to it, and a silver St. Jude medal her grandmother had pressed into her palm the summer she turned 14. Everything else she had ever owned, the apartment on Spring Garden Street, the engagement ring, the small blue Honda, even the photograph of her mother in the pearl earrings, was in a federal evidence locker in Center City, Philadelphia, or in the hands of men who had been looking for her since Tuesday. Her name was Elena Rossi. She had been engaged for 11 months to a man whose family she had not known was a family. And on the last Wednesday in September, she pulled up the gravel drive of a boarded-up farmhouse on Route 512, in a county whose name she could not pronounce. And she stopped the car because the deed in the glove box said the house was hers. The farmhouse did not want her. The porch sagged. The windows were papered for me inside with yellowed newsprint from a decade that no longer existed. A hand-painted sign reading, "No trespassing," had faded to almost nothing on the barn door, and the mailbox at the end of the drive had a wasp nest in it the size of a child's fist. She did not know that first afternoon that behind the collapsed spring house there was a stone well with a wooden cover, and that inside the well, 41 feet down and lodged against a limestone shelf, there was a dark green steel briefcase. She did not know what was inside the briefcase. She did not know whose voice would eventually explain it to her from a reel-to-reel tape she would find in a pump house wall. She did not know that the man who had left it all had been dead for 19 years and had been waiting for her, specifically, without ever having met her. But before the briefcase, before the tapes, before the two ornate gold-plated pistols lying nose-to-nose in the velvet lining, like something out of a museum she had never been allowed to visit, before any of that, there was the Tuesday morning in Philadelphia, when a woman in a federal windbreaker looked her in the eye and told her she was not, in the government's opinion, worth protecting. That is where this begins. Not at the well. In a hallway with fluorescent light, and a man in handcuffs she still loved, being walked past her as if she were a stranger. The safe house was on the 9th floor of a building on Arch Street that pretended to be an insurance office. Elena had been there for 6 days. She had been given a cot, a stack of unmarked T-shirts, and a laminated card with a phone number on it. And she had been told, twice a day, that a woman named Karen Doyle was going to come see her when the paperwork was ready. On the 6th day, Karen Doyle came. Doyle was in her 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she carried a manila folder the way a butcher carries a cleaver. She sat across from Elena at a folding table, and she did not sit down all the way, only perched on the edge of the chair as if she planned to leave before the conversation was over. She opened the folder. She did not look at Elena when she spoke. She looked at the folder. She said, "Miss Rossi, I have some news for you, and it isn't the news you want." Elena said, "Is Danny okay?" Doyle said, "Mr. Rossi is in federal custody, and he will remain there. I'm here about you." Then she said the sentence that Elena would repeat in her head for months, waking and sleeping, the sentence that would follow her up the highway and into the gravel driveway and down into the well. She said, "The determination has been made that you do not meet the threshold for protective placement. You are collateral, Miss Rossi. You are not a client." Elena said, "I saw them kill a man." Doyle closed the folder. She said, "You saw a body. That's not the same thing. And frankly, given the family you're about to marry into, we have to consider the possibility that your account is not clean. I'm sorry. There's a bus station on Filbert. There's a shelter on Vine. There's a number on this card if something changes. We're going to need the room by 6. She slid $340 in cash across the table in a Ziploc bag. Not 400. Not 5. 340. As if it had been counted out of a petty cash drawer by someone who was annoyed to be doing it. She slid a burner phone next to it. She stood up. On her way out, Karen Doyle did one small thing that Elena would not forgive. She looked at the silver St. Jude medal at Elena's throat, and she said, "That's pretty. You should tuck that in. Rural Pennsylvania. People notice Catholic things." Then the door closed, and Elena Rossi, 25 years old, a paralegal at Braverman & Co., who had been 6 months from taking the LSAT, sat alone in a room that had been paid for by taxpayers who had already decided she was not one of them. Down the hall from the elevator bank, she heard the sound of a man in cuffs being walked past. She did not look up. She had promised him she would not look up. That was the last time she was in the same building as Danny Rossi. The bus to Easton cost $32. She took it because Easton was north, and because Danny, in the one visit she had been allowed, had said the word Northampton, and then had closed his mouth like he had said too much. She got off at the Eastern Terminal at 4:40 in the afternoon. It was 61 degrees and the sky was the color of wet newsprint. She spent the first night in a day's inn off Route 22 that cost $79 plus tax. And she paid in cash and gave the desk clerk the name Elena Baroni, because it was the first name that came into her head that was not hers and not Danny's. And she did not know then why that name felt right in her mouth. On the second day, she moved to a motel called the Bel Air that cost $42 a night and did not ask for a name at all. She ate from a Wawa across the parking lot. A turkey sandwich was $5.49. A large coffee was $2.19. She counted the days on the back of the receipt. Day 1, day 2, day 3. On the fourth day, she was down to $211, and she understood, sitting on the edge of a bed in a room that smelled like carpet cleaner, that she was going to run out before anything changed. On the fifth day, she opened the envelope Danny had given her the last time she had been alone with him. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times, with 2 things on it. The first was an address, 4418 Route 512, Wind Gap. The second was one line in his handwriting. If it goes bad, this is yours. It has been yours since before we met. Don't ask me how. Just go. She had not looked at the paper for 6 days, because looking at it made her hands shake. Now she looked at it, and she made a decision. She would drive out to the address. She would look at whatever was there. If it was nothing, she would go to the shelter on Vine Street, on the number Doyle had left her, and she would let herself become the kind of statistic she had once written case notes about at the firm. She did not know yet about the dog that would find her on the porch. She did not know about Merle Kepler across the creek, who would watch her from behind a pair of binoculars for 2 full days before he introduced himself. She did not know that in her satchel, tucked in a side pocket, was the one thing that would eventually save her. Her paralegal badge from Braverman & Cole, which listed in small print her certifications, including her federal evidence handling course, completed the previous spring. The car was a 2009 Toyota Camry she had bought off a co-worker for cash the previous summer, and it was, by then, the only asset the federal government had not seized because the title was in her mother's maiden name. For tax reasons, she had never fully understood. She loaded her leather satchel into the passenger seat. She loaded the Ziploc bag of cash into the glove box. She loaded a plastic gallon of water and 3 protein bars she had bought at the Wawa. She put the St. Jude medal inside her shirt, the way Karen Doyle had told her to, and then, because of who had told her, she pulled it back out again. She drove north on Route 33 and then west on Route 512, and the towns became smaller and the hills became larger, and the light through the sugar maples became the exact gold color she remembered from a single summer as a child at a cousin's cabin in the Poconos. She passed a farm with a hand-lettered sign that said, "Sweet corn, $4 DOS." She passed a Methodist church with a signboard that said, "God sees you even when the state does not," and she almost laughed and then almost cried, because it felt like a message, and she was too tired to know from whom. The mailbox at 4418 was leaning at 45 degrees. The number was legible only because someone had once carved it into the wood with a knife. The driveway was 2 ruts in the grass. She drove up the ruts, and she came out into a yard the size of a small parking lot, and there, in front of her, was a white 2-story farmhouse with a porch that had begun to buckle on the left side, and a field of goldenrod behind it that came almost up to the second-floor windows. She sat in the car for 11 minutes. She did not know how she knew it was 11 minutes. She looked at the dashboard clock when she stopped, and she looked at it again when she opened the door. Nothing moved except the goldenrod. There was no dog barking, There was no neighbor. There was a stone chimney and a rusted weather vane shaped like a rooster and a barn with the roof half caved in. And beyond all of it, at the edge of a stand of black walnut trees, there was something small and round and stone-colored that she could not, from that distance, identify. She got out of the car. She had never in her life been anywhere this quiet. She put her hand on the porch rail and it moved, and she said out loud to nobody, "Okay, okay, this is where we are." The front door was locked, with a padlock that had rusted shut. She walked around the porch. The back door was locked too, but the frame around it had rotted, and when she put her shoulder against it, the whole door moved as one soft, tired unit and gave up. Inside, the farmhouse smelled like three things layered on top of each other: mildew, old cedar, and faintly gun oil, though she did not know then that that was what it was. The kitchen was from another era: harvest gold linoleum, a Frigidaire that had once been avocado green, a wall calendar from November of 2004 with the days up to the 11th crossed off in red pen. The living room had 2 chairs and a wood stove and a rag rug so faded she could not tell what color it had originally been. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub full of dust. In the smaller bedroom, on the bed, was a folded quilt in a pattern of interlocking rings, and on top of the quilt, as if someone had laid it there and walked out, was a woman's cardigan sweater in cornflower blue, size medium. Someone had lived here. Someone had stopped living here in the middle of a Thursday in November of 2004 and had not come back. The deed in Elena's glove box listed the owner as Salvatore Baroni and listed the transfer as a quitclaim in trust, minor beneficiary, filed August 12, 2001. She was, according to the paperwork, the beneficiary. She did not, on that first walkthrough, understand how that could possibly be. She had never heard the name Baroni in her life, except once, years before she and Danny were engaged. When Danny had come home from work at his uncle's law office on Snyder Avenue and had said over dinner that a client named Sal had died, and had said it in a voice that had made her stop chewing. She had not thought about that dinner in 5 years. She thought about it now. She spent the rest of that first afternoon going through the house. She found dishes in the cupboards. She found a can of chock-full of nuts coffee in the pantry, unopened, expiration date January 2005. She found, in the front hall closet, a man's canvas barn coat in size XL, and a woman's raincoat in size small, and in the pocket of the raincoat, a pharmacy receipt from a CVS in Bethlehem, dated November 9, 2004, for 2 prescriptions and a package of hairbands. She found no photographs anywhere. Every surface where a photograph might have stood, the mantel, the top of the piano in the parlor, the little table by the front door had a rectangle of unfaded paint where something had been removed. Someone had come through this house before she had, and had taken every face out of it, but they had left the coats, and they had not, she would learn, gone anywhere near the well. On the second day, she woke on the couch in the parlor at 6:20 in the morning to the sound of something breathing on the porch. She sat up very slowly and she reached for the only thing near her, which was a cast-iron poker from the wood stove. She went to the front window and she looked out through the gap in the newsprint. On the porch, lying against the front door as if it were his front door, was a blue tick hound, middle-aged, underfed, one ear torn. He looked up at her through the glass with the calm, exhausted patience of a dog who has decided, on his own, that this is where he lives now. She opened the door. He did not move except to thump his tail once on the boards. She named him Judge, because he looked, she would later say, like something that had come to sit in judgment of her, and had decided, against the evidence, to acquit. She fed him a protein bar. She sat with him on the step, and that was how she was sitting when she looked, for the first time in real daylight, at the structure at the edge of the walnut trees. It was a well. She could see now that it was a well. The stone ring came up to about mid-thigh. There was a wooden cover on it, made of 2x4s nailed to a crosspiece, and the cover had been fitted so precisely that the wood had not warped away from the stone even after. She did not yet know how many years. That was the first mismatch, Everything else on the property had rotted or sagged or leaned. The barn roof had caved. The spring house behind the barn had collapsed on itself like a folded card. The chicken coop had no wire on it, but the well cover was tight, as if it had been maintained, as if someone had come, quietly, on some schedule, and had made sure of it. The second mismatch was the rope. There was a rope tied to an iron ring on the outside of the stone ring, coiled neatly, and the rope was not old. It was newer than the rest of the property. It was maybe 5 years old. It was maybe less. The third mismatch was smaller. Around the stone base of the well, the grass was different. The goldenrod had come right up to the spring house, right up to the barn, right up to the porch. Around the well, in a rough circle about 6 feet across, there was only short green grass, as if something in the ground beneath the well was keeping the goldenrod from taking hold. Or as if someone had been mowing. She looked at Judge. Judge looked at the well. She said, out loud, "Okay, all right then." And she went to get the poker. She pried up the wooden cover with the poker. It came off in one piece, heavy enough that she had to set it down carefully so it did not crack the stone. The mouth of the well opened up beneath her, a stone shaft going down into a darkness that had a smell to it, cold and mineral, and something else underneath, something faintly metallic. She dropped a pebble. She counted. She heard it hit stone, not water, at what she estimated was about 40 feet. The well was dry, or nearly dry. She untied the rope from the iron ring, and she lowered a metal bucket she had found in the barn. The silver one, dented on the side, down into the shaft, using the rope as a plumb line. At about 38 feet, the bucket stopped moving smoothly. It caught on something. She pulled it up. She lowered it again. It caught on the same thing. She lay on her stomach on the grass and put her head over the edge, and Judge lay next to her with his chin on his paws, and she shone the flashlight from her burner phone down into the shaft. There was something down there, something rectangular, wedged against a shelf in the limestone. It took her 4 hours. She rigged a harness from the rope and 2 of the leather belts she found in a bedroom closet. She lowered herself in stages, her feet against the stone, her hands raw against the rope. Judge whining softly at the rim. Later she would say the descent was the longest, 38 feet of her life. When she reached the shelf, she got both hands under the rectangle, and she worked it loose from where it had been jammed for, she did not yet know, 19 years. She hauled it up on a second rope. When it came into the sunlight, she saw what it was. A metal briefcase, dark green, about the size of a large lunchbox. 2 brass clasps. Faintly, on the side, in stenciled letters that had almost worn off, S. Barone. She sat on the grass with the briefcase between her knees. Judge sat next to her. She opened the clasps. Inside, on a bed of dark green velvet cut to shape, were 2 ornate pistols, plated in what appeared to be real gold, with mother-of-pearl grips and engraving so fine she could not read it without leaning in. They were laid nose to nose like 2 commas. Between them, folded once, was a slip of light brown paper. On the paper, in ballpoint pen, in the careful printing of a man who had learned handwriting in a Catholic school in the 1960s, was a single sentence. If you found these, then you found the well. And if you found the well, then the house is doing what I built it to do. Do not sell the guns. They are the map. There was no signature. Elena put her hand over her mouth. She did not at first know what the note meant. She sat on the porch for an hour with the briefcase open on the boards next to her, and she looked at the guns, and she looked at the goldenrod, and she waited for the sentence to make sense. Then she picked up the left-hand pistol. Underneath the pistol, cut into the velvet, was a shallow well the exact shape of the gun, and in the center of that well, taped flat with a piece of yellowed masking tape, was a brass key. The key was small, a lockbox key, or the key to a filing cabinet. There was no tag on it. She picked up the right-hand pistol. Underneath it, another key, slightly larger, a door key cut from brass. The teeth were unusual, long and irregular, the kind of key that opened something old. She sat back on her heels. The guns were not the treasure. The guns were paperweights. The guns had been holding the keys down inside the well for 19 years, because a briefcase full of paper would have rotted, and a briefcase full of loose metal would have rattled. And a man named Sal Baroni had known, when he built this hiding place, that whoever eventually found it would need to be told, without words, that the visible thing was not the point. She turned the pistols over in her hands. Now that she was looking properly, she could see the engraving. On the barrel of the left-hand pistol, in tiny script that must have been done by a jeweler, not a gunsmith. Pantry. On the barrel of the right-hand pistol, pump house. 2 keys, 2 locations. She stood up. Judge stood up. She went to the pantry first, because it was closer. The pantry was the little walk-in room off the kitchen, its shelves lined with mouse-chewed shelf paper and the ancient can of chock-full of nuts. She looked at the floor. She looked at the walls. She looked at the ceiling. There was no lock. There was no cabinet. There was nothing that a small brass key could open. She went and got Judge, because Judge had, in the 2 days she had known him, become the thing she went and got when she was stuck. Judge came into the pantry with her and immediately lay down on the floor in the far corner, on a section of linoleum that was slightly raised. She looked at where he was lying. She looked at the linoleum. She got down on her hands and knees, and she peeled back the corner of the linoleum, and underneath, cut into the pine floorboards, was a square hatch about the size of a dinner plate, with a small brass keyhole on one side. The smaller key fit, the hatch lifted. Under the hatch was a floor safe, not a modern safe. An old one, cast iron painted black, with a dial like something out of a western. The key did not open the safe. The key had only opened the hatch that hid the safe. On the top of the safe, someone had stuck a small square of paper, and on the paper, in the same careful hand as the note between the pistols, was a sentence. This is the last door. Do not try to force it. When you know what it needs, you will know I trusted you. She sat on the pantry floor and she read the sentence twice, and she felt, for the first time since Karen Doyle had slid $340 across a folding table, something that was not fear. It was closer to being addressed. Someone had left this house set up like a series of rooms in a museum, and each room said, in a voice she was starting to recognize, I knew someone like you would come, and I planned for it. She closed the hatch. She smoothed the linoleum back down. She took the other key, the larger brass one, out of her pocket. She went out the kitchen door and across the yard toward the pump house at the edge of the walnut trees, which she had assumed, until that moment, was just another collapsed outbuilding. She decided, standing in that doorway with the larger key in her hand, that she was not going to leave the property to find a hardware store or a locksmith, even though she was nearly out of food. She decided that whatever was in the pump house was more important than what was in her stomach. This was the first decision she made as the person she was becoming, and not the person she had been. The pump house was made of stone. She had not registered that on the first walkthrough because it was so overgrown with wild grape that from 30 feet away it looked like a mound of vines. Up close, when she pulled the vines aside, she could see that the walls were fieldstone laid in lime mortar, the same stone as the well, and that the door, a heavy plank door with iron strap hinges, was newer than the stone by about a century. Someone had put a real door on a very old shed. Someone had cared about this shed. The brass key turned in the lock. The door opened. Inside, on a dirt floor, was exactly what you would expect. An old cast-iron hand pump, a coil of copper pipe, a workbench, a set of hand tools hanging from a pegboard in the shape she had seen in old hardware stores. Each tool outlined in black paint. She stood in the doorway and she was, briefly, disappointed. And then she remembered the note. When you know what it needs. This was a room designed by a man who taught by a mission. She stepped inside. She began to look at the pegboard. Every tool was where its outline said it should be, except one. The outline of a small ball-peen hammer, third row from the top, was empty. There was no ball-peen hammer hanging from that hook. She looked around the room. On the workbench, resting on top of a folded blue shop rag, was the ball-peen hammer, placed there, set aside. She picked up the hammer. Under the shop rag, someone had drawn in carpenter's pencil a small arrow. The arrow pointed at the wall behind the workbench. She dragged the workbench away from the wall. Judge sat in the doorway and watched, which was, she realized, what he did instead of helping. Behind the workbench, the stones of the wall were the same as everywhere else, except that one stone, at knee height, had a fine dark line around it, the kind of line that says, "This stone comes out." She tapped the stone with the hammer. It rang differently from the others. She worked the hammer's claw into the mortar line. The stone slid out in her hands. It was hollow behind, a cavity about the size of a shoebox, and inside the cavity, wrapped in oilcloth, were two things. The first was a hard-bound ledger, dark green cloth cover, no title. She opened it. It was full of columns of numbers and code names: merchant, tailor, baker, priest, and dollar figures ranging from 4-digit to 7-digit, dated in the left column from January of 1998 through October of 2004. She was a paralegal. She had seen enough discovery documents at Braverman and Cole to know exactly what she was looking at. This was a shadow ledger. This was somebody's second set of books. The second thing in the cavity was smaller. It was a photograph. A single Polaroid. It showed a girl, maybe 7 years old, in a First Communion dress, standing on the front porch of this farmhouse in what looked like the summer of 1986. She had dark curls and a gap between her front teeth. On the white border at the bottom of the Polaroid, in the same careful printing, Isabella, 07-1486. 7 years old today. She will never see this place. That is the price. Elena sat down on the dirt floor of the pump house, and without deciding to, she began to cry. Not loudly, just the shoulders. The girl in the Polaroid was somebody's daughter, and the man whose voice was in this house had built the house for her, for Isabella, and had known, in 1986 in July, on his daughter's 7th birthday, that Isabella would never be allowed to come here. That there was a price for what he did, and Isabella was going to pay it whether he lived or died. He had built 2 houses in his head. The house he lived in with his family, where his daughter was safe because she did not know his other life, and this house, out here on Route 512, where he kept everything that his other life would eventually need somebody to find. He had not built this house for himself. He had built it as a bequest to a stranger. She was the stranger. She wrapped the ledger back up in the oilcloth. She put the Polaroid inside the front cover of the ledger. She carried it back to the farmhouse, and she laid it on the kitchen table. Judge followed her the whole way and did not once look back at the pump house. That night, she read the ledger by the light of the battery lantern she had found under the kitchen sink. She read it the way she had once read case files at the firm, slowly, in pencil, making a legend on a separate sheet of paper. By 2 a.m., she had cracked most of the code names. Merchant was a wholesale food distributor she had seen mentioned on the local news 6 months ago in a story about a health code investigation. Taylor was a garment factory in South Philadelphia that she was almost certain her fiancé's uncle had once represented. Priest was the one that made her set the pencil down for 10 minutes, because Priest, cross-referenced with the dollar figures and the dates, was almost certainly a sitting federal magistrate. On the last written page of the ledger, below the final entry dated October 30, 2004, 12 days before the calendar in the kitchen stopped being crossed off, there was a diagram. It was a small pen and ink drawing of the pump house wall, seen from inside, with the workbench pushed aside. The stone she had already removed was marked with a small check, and below it, 4 stones over and 2 stones down. A second stone was marked with a small circle. She was back in the pump house at first light with the ball-peen hammer. Judge came with her. She counted stones. 4 over, 2 down. She tapped. It rang. She worked the mortar line. The second cavity was bigger than the first. It went back into the wall almost 18 inches, into a hollow that had been deliberately dug out and lined with sheet copper to keep out moisture. Inside, standing on end like books on a shelf, were 12 reel-to-reel tapes in RCA canisters. Each canister was labeled in the same careful hand, not with dates, with rooms. Kitchen 1, Kitchen 2. Study, car. Back booth 2. Phone 2. Basement, wedding, funeral, last. She lifted the last canister out first, because she was human. She opened it. Inside was a reel of 1/4-inch magnetic tape, and taped to the underside of the lid, a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. It was another note, longer than the first. 2, and this one had a date at the top. November 8, 2004. 3 days before the calendar in the kitchen had stopped. To whoever is reading this, I am writing this on a Monday night. On Thursday, I am supposed to sit down in a room in Philadelphia with 2 federal prosecutors and give them what is on these tapes. I do not think I am going to make it to Thursday. My wife knows. My daughter does not. If I am wrong and I do make it, I will come back here and I will burn this note and take the tapes with me, and you will never have found any of this. If I am right, then somebody eventually will find their way here. Probably somebody who is running from the same people I was going to talk about, and the tapes will do the work I was not allowed to finish. My name is Salvatore Barone. I kept books for men who thought I would keep them forever. I did not. I am sorry it has to reach you this way. I have tried, in the arrangement of this place, to make it feel like an inheritance and not an ambush. Whoever you are, the house is yours. The land is yours. What the tapes are worth to the government, in reward money and forfeiture share, is yours. Take it. Build something with it that is the opposite of what I helped build. SB. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it back up and put it in the pocket over her heart, because she did not, at that moment, know where else to put it. Judge was leaning against her leg. He had never, in the 2 days she had known him, leaned against her leg before. She would remember that. She did not play the tapes. She had no reel-to-reel player. She would need to get one, or she would need to get the tapes to somebody who did, and she would need to do it without being followed. And she would need to do it soon, because she understood now that she had between 3 days and 3 weeks before the men who were looking for her would work out, the way they always eventually work things out, where the paper trail on this farmhouse actually led. She almost missed it. She had already lifted all 12 canisters out of the cavity and had set them on the workbench, and she had by then been in the pump house for close to an hour. And Judge had started to whine because he wanted to be back on the porch. She reached in one more time, just to be sure the cavity was empty, and her fingertips brushed something at the very back, a square of oilcloth taped to the inside of the copper lining with what looked like electrical tape from the 1990s. She peeled it loose. She brought it out into the light. Inside the oilcloth was a single sheet of drafting paper. On the paper, in blue ink, was a plat map of the 22 acres of the farmhouse, the property line, the driveway, the barn, the spring house, the pump house, the well, the house itself. Around the drawing of the house in the margins were annotations in the same careful hand. Pantry floor safe, see note. Well, briefcase. Pump house wall, ledger, tapes. Barn loft, nothing, decoy. And in the very bottom corner of the map, in smaller writing, 3 lines. The safe under the pantry is the last thing. It contains the one document I could not put anywhere else. The combination is my daughter Isabella's birthday, July 14th, 1979. Open it last. Read what is inside once, then decide what to do. Elena carried the map back to the farmhouse. She sat at the kitchen table with the ledger on one side of her, and the tapes stacked on the other side, and the plat map in front of her. And she thought about the fact that Sal Barone had had a daughter named Isabella, who had been born in 1979, which meant that Isabella, if she was alive, was now in her middle 40s. And she thought about the fact that Sal Barone had made the combination of his last safe, the birthday of a daughter he had made sure would never see this place. He had made the last door in the house openable only by someone who knew his daughter well enough to know her birthday, or by someone who found the map. The map was, in a sense, the daughter he could not have. Elena did not, that night, open the safe. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, and she looked at the map, and she thought about a great many things. She thought about Karen Doyle. She thought about Danny in a federal holding cell in Philadelphia. and whether Danny had known, when he had handed her the address, that this was what was here. She thought about Sal's line, "Build something with it that is the opposite of what I helped build," and she thought, with a small cold click in the back of her mind, that she already knew what she was going to do with the money if any of this actually paid out. She thought about the fact that the last note, the one in the last canister, had been dated November 8, 2004, and that the calendar in the kitchen had been crossed off up to November 11, and that meant Sal Baroni had come back to this house 3 more times after he had written that note, and had left the note in place, which meant that on the last of those 3 days he had known, when he closed the door behind him, that he was not coming back. She thought about that for a long time. She did not open the safe. She left the safe closed because the map had told her to open it last, and because she understood, now, that everything in this house was arranged in an order, and the order was not decorative. It was pastoral. Sal Baroni had built her a path, and he had built it in the sequence a person needed to walk it in order to become the person capable of holding what was in the last room. If she opened the safe now, she would not be that person. She would be a woman who had rushed the last door, and she would spend the rest of her life knowing she had rushed it. She closed the pantry hatch. She smoothed the linoleum. She went out on the porch and she sat next to Judge, and she watched the goldenrod move in the last of the light, and she waited for morning. That was when the pickup truck came up the driveway. Before the pickup truck comes to a stop in the yard, I want to say one thing that is not part of Elena's story, and it is this. Everything that happens in the next 20 minutes of this video, the man who gets out of the truck, the deadline he is about to give her, and the sealed document in the pantry safe, is why I make these stories. If you want the next one, the subscribe button is right there. Now, back to the farmhouse and the sound of gravel. The pickup truck was a Ford F-250, dark green, and the man who got out of it was not, as Elena had first feared, one of Danny's uncle's men. He was in his 70s, wearing a Carhartt jacket over a flannel shirt, and he walked toward the porch with the deliberate slowness of a man who wanted her to see him coming. He stopped 10 feet from the steps. Judge, in fact, went down the steps to meet him, which told Elena more about the man than any conversation would have. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Merle Kepler. I live across the creek. I have been watching you for 2 days through a pair of binoculars that used to belong to my brother, who was in the Navy. I owe you an apology for that, and I owe you an explanation. May I come up on the porch?" She said yes. He came up on the porch. He sat on the top step, not on the chair which she registered as a courtesy. He did not look at her. He looked at the goldenrod. "I knew Sal," he said. "I want you to know that first. I knew Sal Baroni for 9 years. He would come out here on weekends, sometimes with his wife, never with his daughter. He told me once his daughter didn't know about the place, and it needed to stay that way. I didn't ask why. Sal wasn't the kind of man you asked. He was quiet. He fixed the pump himself. He put the new door on the pump house himself. He and I remortared that well one summer, 1999, I think, because the frost had opened up 2 of the courses. I never asked him what he did in Philadelphia. I figured it was his to say or not to say." He paused. He rubbed his palms on his knees. "In November of '04, he came out here on a Wednesday, and he sat on this porch with me for about 3 hours, and he didn't say much. Then he went home. That was a Thursday. I know because I remember I was going to a livestock auction on the Friday. He did not come back after that. I read in the paper, the Express Times, 4 days later, that a man named Salvatore Baroni had been found in the Delaware River near Frenchtown. They said it was accidental. I didn't believe them. I have not believed them for 19 years. He looked at her finally. "I know who you are, Miss Rossi. I know because a man came through here on Tuesday morning, day before you got here, asking questions at the diner in Windgap. Big man. Philadelphia accent. Showed a photograph. Your photograph. He said he was your uncle. I don't believe him either. I came over here today to tell you that I don't think you have very much time, and I came to tell you that if you need somewhere to be that is not here, my barn has a room in the back with a wood stove and a lock on the door. And my wife has been dead 6 years, and I would not mind the company. And I came to tell you that whatever Sal put in this house, and I always suspected he put something in this house. It belongs to you now, and I will stand on that in front of any man who says otherwise." He was quiet for a while. "That's my piece," he said. Elena had not, since the woman who had called her collateral, been spoken to by a person who assumed she was telling the truth. She sat on the porch chair, and she looked at Merle Kepler, and she said, "The man asking questions. Was his name Marchetti?" "That's the name he gave the waitress," Merle said. "Nicky, he said his name was Nicky." Elena closed her eyes. Nicky Two Rivers Marchetti was Danny Ross's uncle, the capo whose books Sal Barone had kept and betrayed. Nicky did not yet know about the tapes. Nicky knew only that Sal's farmhouse had ended up in a probate filing that his own nephew's law office had handled, and that his nephew, who was currently in federal custody, had given the address to a fiancée, who had now disappeared. Nicky was coming to make sure that whatever was at the farmhouse never surfaced. By the end of that same night, sitting at Merle Kepler's kitchen table across the creek, because Merle had insisted, and because Elena had, for the first time in 7 days, allowed herself to be insisted upon, she had a picture of what she was up against. She laid it out for Merle on a sheet of yellow legal paper, because it helped her to see it. The problem had 4 parts. The first part was Nicky Marchetti. Nicky was already in Northampton County. Nicky had, within the next several days, a very high probability of driving up Route 512 and finding the mailbox that said 4418. Once he did that, everything in the farmhouse would be at risk. The tapes, the ledger, the safe, and Elena. The second part was Karen Doyle. Elena had spent the previous 4 hours going through what she remembered of Doyle's file on Danny, and she had realized something she had not, in her fear, seen clearly at the time. Doyle had denied Elena protective placement, not because Elena did not qualify, but because if Elena qualified, Elena's testimony would then have to be scrutinized, and Elena's testimony was going to include a name, one specific name, that Doyle did not want in a courtroom. That name was priest from the ledger, the federal magistrate. Doyle had, at some point in the past 6 years, Elena did not yet know when, become compromised. Doyle had cut Elena loose to protect a magistrate whose corruption Sal Barone's tapes almost certainly documented. Doyle was not a bystander. Doyle was Nicky's second front. The third part was the tapes themselves. Elena had 12 reel-to-reel tapes, a ledger, a plat map, and 1 sealed floor safe. She had, in her leather satchel back at the farmhouse, her paralegal badge from Braverman and Cole, which certified her in federal evidence chain of custody procedure. She knew, in principle, what she needed to do. She needed to catalog each item, photograph it in situ, generate a chain of custody document, and hand-deliver everything to a federal official who was not Karen Doyle and not anyone in Doyle's office. She knew who that person was. David Auerbach, her old evidence professor at Temple, who had left the United States Attorney's Office in Newark 12 years ago, after, she remembered now, a scandal involving a compromised prosecution he had refused to sign off on. Auerbach was clean. Auerbach would know what to do. The fourth part was time. If Merle was right that Nicky had been in Windgap on Tuesday, then Elena had, at most, 4 days. She wrote it all down. She numbered the items. She numbered the deadlines. Merle watched her do it, and after a while he said, "You've done this before. Not like this," she said. "But yes, this is what I do for a living." Or it was. That night she called David Auerbach from the burner phone at 11:14 p.m. He answered on the 4th ring. He remembered her. She spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. He did not interrupt her. When she was done, he was quiet for a while, and then he said one sentence, which she wrote down on the legal pad because she wanted to remember it verbatim. He said, "Elena, don't move the tapes. Don't move the ledger. Don't move any of it. I will be at that address by Sunday morning with 2 people I trust. Photograph everything in place, tonight, tomorrow, and Saturday. Log each photograph. Do not open the safe. If Marchetti gets there before I do, you leave everything and you go to the neighbor. Everything you're describing is only worth something if the chain of custody holds. Do the paralegal work, Elena. It's the only thing that keeps this real." She hung up. She looked at Merle. She said, "I need to go back to the house." Merle said, "I'll drive you." The next 40 hours were the strangest of her life. She slept in shifts on the parlor couch. Judge slept across her feet. She photographed every object she had found. The briefcase, the pistols, the note between the pistols, the 2 keys, the pantry hatch, the floor safe with its lid still closed, the pump house wall, both cavities, the ledger open to each of its pages, the plat map, each of the 12 tape canisters, each of the notes. She wrote a chain of custody log by hand, in the format she had been taught, on the yellow legal paper. She numbered every exhibit. She initialed every entry. She dated everything. She did not open the safe. On the Saturday afternoon, at 3:42 p.m., a black Cadillac SUV came up the driveway. It was not David Auerbach. Auerbach was not due until Sunday. The man who got out of the Cadillac was not, this time, Merle Kepler. He was in his 60s, in a charcoal suit with no tie, and he moved the way men move who have not, in a long time, been told no. Elena, at the kitchen window, recognized him from the one Christmas dinner she had ever been to at Danny's uncle's house. He was Nicky. He did not knock. He tried the front door, which was still padlocked from the outside, because Elena had, out of caution, relocked it that morning and had been using the back door. He walked around the porch. Elena, inside, moved from the kitchen to the pantry, silently, and she stood over the linoleum where the hatch was. Because she had decided, in the 2 seconds it had taken her to see him get out of the SUV, that if he found the hatch, he would find it over her body. He came in through the back door. Nicky Marchetti did not, at first, do anything violent. He walked through the kitchen with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked at the calendar from November of 2004 on the wall. He looked at the yellow legal pad on the table, which Elena had, thank God, flipped over face down before she had moved to the pantry. He looked at the coffee can. He looked for a long time at the pantry doorway where Elena was standing. He said, "Hello, sweetheart." She said, "Nicky." He said, "You look terrible. When was the last time you ate?" She did not answer. He walked toward her. He was 3 feet from her when he stopped, because Judge, who had, until that moment, been asleep on the parlor rug, came into the kitchen and stood between them and made, low in his throat, a sound Elena had not known he was capable of. Nicky looked at the dog. He said, "Whose is that?" "Mine," Elena said. Nicky said, "Since when?" "Since Wednesday." He nodded, slowly, as if she had just told him something significant. He took a step back. "Elena," he said, "I'm going to be straight with you, because I have always liked you, and because Danny always said you were the smart one. There is something in this house that belonged to a man who worked for me a long time ago. That man made a mistake. He tried to sell my books to the government, and he did not get the chance to finish the transaction. What he had, the papers, the tapes, whatever he had, is mine. I am not going to pretend otherwise. You are going to tell me where it is, and then I am going to take it, and then I am going to leave, and you are going to stay here in this house and live a long life, and nobody is going to bother you again. That is the deal. That is a good deal. Danny would want you to take it." Elena said, "Danny doesn't want anything anymore, Nicky. Danny is in a federal cell because you put him there." Nicky said, "That is not accurate." Elena said, "Danny gave me this address. Danny knew what was here. Danny handled Sal Barone's probate at your law office in 2001. And Danny put my name on the beneficiary line because Danny already knew in 2001 that eventually he was going to need to hand me a piece of paper and tell me to go. Danny has been building me an exit for 6 years, Nicky. You didn't know that. You should have known that. That is what you missed." She had not, until she said it, understood that this was true. She said it, and she heard it, and she knew, immediately, that it was the correct account of the last 6 years of her life. Danny had known. Danny had married her, or nearly married her, knowing that one day he might have to hand her a farmhouse full of tapes, and disappear. Danny had loved her, in his terrible, complicated way, more than she had understood. Nicky's face changed. It was a small change, but she saw it. He said, "Sweetheart, where are the tapes?" That was when she made the dormant skill land. She said, The tapes are in a federal evidence locker in Newark. As of 11:14 p.m. on Thursday night, they are logged, catalogued, and photographed under a chain of custody that is countersigned by former United States Attorney David Auerbach. They were moved off this property Friday morning by a courier service that operates under federal contract. If I do not check in with Auerbach's office by 6 p.m. tonight, he will file the affidavit that has been sitting on his desk since yesterday morning. If anything happens to me between now and 6 p.m., that affidavit files itself. If anything happens to Danny Rossi in custody, that affidavit files itself. If anything happens to a man named Merle Kepler across the creek, that affidavit files itself. The tapes are gone, Nikki. You are late by 48 hours. What you can do now is you can walk out of this kitchen and get in your car and drive south. Or you can find out what the tapes say about Priest, on the record, in a courtroom next spring. None of it was true. The tapes were, at that moment, in the pump house cavity, under a piece of oilcloth. But she had photographed them. She had logged them. She had spoken to Auerbach. Auerbach was coming Sunday. The lie was 92 hours ahead of the truth. It only had to hold for one afternoon. Nikki looked at her for a long time. Judge did not move. Nikki said quietly, "You are Danny's, huh?" Elena said, "I was mine first." Nikki nodded. He walked out through the back door. He got in the Cadillac. He drove down the driveway. She watched the taillights disappear around the bend by the walnut trees. And then she sat down on the linoleum floor of the pantry, over the safe, and she shook for 11 minutes, and Judge lay across her lap and did not move. The next morning, David Auerbach's car came up the driveway at 7:40 a.m., with two people she did not know in the passenger seat and the back. And that was the morning she finally opened the pantry safe. Auerbach was a tall man in his late 60s, with white eyebrows and reading glasses on a lanyard. He had brought with him a woman named Renata Cho, who was a forensic archivist from the National Archives Regional Office in Philadelphia, and a man named Everett Sims, who was a serving assistant United States attorney out of the District of New Jersey. Auerbach did not, when he arrived, waste time on preliminaries. He said, "Show me the chain of custody log first," and Elena showed him on the yellow legal pad, and he read every page, and when he was done he took off his reading glasses, and he said, "Elena, this is admissible, all of it. You did the work." They spent the morning on the tapes and the ledger. Renata catalogued. Everett called his office. Auerbach stood at the kitchen window with his arms folded, watching the goldenrod, and did not speak for a long time. At 11:30 a.m., Elena stood alone in the pantry. She had asked, and they had agreed, that the safe would be opened by her and by her alone. First, she peeled back the linoleum. She lifted the hatch. She knelt on the pine floorboards. She turned the dial. 071479. On the last number, she felt the tumblers give. The safe opened. Inside was one thing, a single envelope. Cream-colored, no writing on the outside. Sealed, she opened it. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, handwritten in blue ballpoint, on the same lined yellow paper Elena had been using for her own log. It was dated November 10, 2004, the day before the calendar in the kitchen had stopped being crossed off. The last day of Sal Barone's life. She read it standing up. She read it once. Then she sat down on the pantry floor, and she read it again. And this is what it said. "To whoever opens this safe, if you have gotten this far, then you already know almost everything. You know the tapes. You know the ledger. You know the girl in the Polaroid as my daughter. You have, by now, probably guessed that the person I built this house for is not precisely you, because I did not know your face. It is any person who ends up in this pantry with the map in her hand, and the safe in front of her, and a reason to have come this far and not sold the pistols along the way. There are, in a given generation, maybe 100 such people. I built the house for whichever one of them found it first. I want to tell you 3 things. The first is that I am not, on the last day of my life, sorry that I kept these books. I am sorry that I kept them for as long as I did before I decided to hand them to somebody who could do something with them. I waited 6 years too long. I waited because I had a daughter and a wife and I was afraid. And I thought, the way men like me always think, that I could wait forever without being asked to choose. I could not. Nobody can, I hope, whoever you are. But you do not wait as long as I did, to hand the thing you have to the person who can carry it. The second is that the money, the reward, the forfeiture share, the value of this land, is not a gift. It is a wage. It is what I owe you for the walk from the well to this pantry. Take it without shame. Build with it whatever you would have built if the world had not, at some point, told you that you were not worth building. The third is that I know what it is like to sit in a room with a person from the government who tells you that you do not qualify. I sat in 3 of those rooms in 1998 before I found the one prosecutor who believed me. And by then I was so tired I almost went home. Do not go home, not to the room you used to live in. Build a new one. This one, if you like it. Any one. But do not go back into the room where somebody told you that you were collateral, because that room is not, and has never been, a room a person can live in. Yours, in a life I do not know. Salvatore Baroni, November 10, 2004. The federal indictments came down in the spring. The tapes named 18 individuals. 14 of them were arrested within the first 10 days. Nicky Two Rivers Marchetti was picked up on a Tuesday morning at his lawyer's office on Snyder Avenue in South Philadelphia, and led out in handcuffs past a photographer from the Inquirer, whose photograph the following day would run above the fold. He would be convicted at trial the following November on 22 counts and sentenced to 31 years in federal prison, of which he would serve 26 before dying, of natural causes, in the Federal Medical Center at Davens. Karen Doyle was more complicated, because Karen Doyle had been careful, but careful, in the face of 12 hours of tape in which Sal Barona had, in his patient accountant's voice, walked federal agents through the payment structure of Doyle's office, was not careful enough. The Office of Professional Responsibility opened a file on her in March. She was suspended in May. She was indicted in October on 8 counts of obstruction of justice and 1 count of conspiracy. She resigned before her disbarment hearing. She would eventually plead to 2 counts and would serve 4 years at Danbury. Elena did not attend any of the hearings. She was asked, once, by a reporter whether she felt vindicated. She said, "I feel accurate," and she would not elaborate. The magistrate, whose code name in the ledger had been Priest, resigned from the bench 2 days after the tapes were played in a closed courtroom. He was 71 years old. He would not survive the year. The federal reward for the tapes, plus Elena's statutory share of the forfeited assets under the relevant provisions, came to $1,400,000, paid over 18 months. The farmhouse and the 22 acres, whose deed had already been in her name since 2001, by a probate filing her fiancé had made on the day he had known, in his own way, that this day might come, the farm remained hers. And Danny Rossi, whose cooperation with federal prosecutors, had it emerged, begun 3 years before his arrest, was released from federal custody the following August, under the terms of a sealed agreement. He did not come to the farmhouse. He wrote her 1 letter, in his own hand, which she read once and then put in a box in the parlor next to Sal's letter, and she did not, for the rest of her life, either open that box again or throw it away. The people in Wingap who had, in the diner, said things to Nicky Marchetti about the woman in the farmhouse. 3 of them, over the winter, came to her door with pies. She let them in. She served them coffee. She did not mention the pies. On the morning of the first hard frost, in mid-October, Elena walked out to the well with a coffee cup in her hand and Judge at her heel. She had, over the previous 3 weeks, done a great deal of paperwork, and had spoken to a great many lawyers, and had answered a great many questions from federal agents, whose names she was already beginning to forget. She had not, in any of that, sat quietly next to the well. She sat quietly next to the well now. She put the coffee cup on the stone ring. She looked at the wooden cover, which she had, the week before, replaced with a new one Merle had helped her build. She did not think, in that moment, about the money. The money was already, in her mind, spoken for. She had spent the previous 10 days on the phone with a legal aid organization in Bethlehem and with an architect in Nazareth, and she had, by then, sketched on the back of an envelope the 7 rooms the farmhouse would need to become in order to be what she was going to build with it. Money, she had learned, was not the vindication. The vindication was something quieter, and it had happened, she realized, in the pantry. The moment she had turned the dial and felt the tumblers give, and had understood that she had earned every one of the numbers, because a man who had never met her had, 19 years earlier, staked his last hour on the possibility that somebody like her would exist, and would not give up. That was the moment. Not the check, not the indictment, not Nicky in cuffs on the front page of the Inquirer. The moment in the pantry when the safe opened, and she had, for the first time in her adult life, been the person a stranger had trusted with the truth. She thought about the woman who had called her collateral briefly. She thought about the phrase, "You are collateral, Miss Rossi." And she thought, and this is the meaning of what Sal had left her, and it is not a sermon, it is the shape of a fact that the word collateral means the thing that stands next to. It means the thing that guarantees the loan. She had, in Karen Doyle's mouth, been made small by that word, but she had been, in Sal Barone's arrangement of this place, exactly what the word actually means. She had been the thing that had stood next to Sal's testimony for 19 years, in the form of a girl he had never met, waiting to arrive. She had been the collateral that had made the whole loan of his life redeemable. She picked up the coffee cup. Judge stood up. She walked back across the yard toward the farmhouse. The goldenrod had gone brown at the tips. The porch, she had already decided, was going to be the first thing she rebuilt. Not because it was falling, because she wanted people coming up that walk in the years ahead to have a good porch to arrive at. The Barone house opened in the June after the first frost. It took 8 months, 3 general contractors, 1 architect, and on more than one afternoon, Merle Kepler in a tool belt, at 74 years old, refusing to be told to sit down. The farmhouse was preserved on the outside, the same white clapboard, the same rusted rooster weather vane, the same porch, now level, that Elena had rebuilt herself in a week of 16-hour days in April. Inside, the rooms had been rearranged. The pantry had been kept exactly as it was, hatch and all, because Elena had decided, without discussing it with anyone, that the hatch would stay. It was not a display. It was a room. A person could sit in the pantry, alone, and know that under the linoleum there was a safe that had once, on a specific morning, opened for a specific woman, on the strength of a specific date. The Barone house took in women who were in the middle of what Elena had privately come to call the hallway, the moment between the room where somebody has told them that they do not qualify for protection, and the room where the world has, one way or another, decided what will happen to them next. The house held 12 beds. There were 2 paralegals on staff, and, on retainer, an evidence attorney, and 2 former federal prosecutors, one of whom was David Auerbach, and one of whom was Everett Sims. The house did not do publicity. Women arrived by word of mouth, or by referral from a small list of clergy and public defenders whom Elena trusted. In its first year, the house handled 61 intakes. In its second year, 94. By the third year, it had a satellite office in Bethlehem and a legal clinic in Easton. Elena did not sit for interviews. She did not put her name on the deed of the non-profit. The non-profit's founding documents named its beneficiary as the estate of Salvatore Barone, in trust for those his testimony did not reach in time, which was a legal construction Auerbach had drafted, and which had made the IRS's job more difficult than it might otherwise have been, but which had passed. On the wall of the front hall, in a simple wooden frame, there was one photograph. It was the Polaroid from the pump house wall. Isabella, in her first communion dress, on the porch of the farmhouse in the summer of 1986. Elena had, through Auerbach, tried once to locate Isabella Barone. She had learned that Isabella had died in 2011 of an illness that Sal, mercifully, had not lived to see. She had not learned much else. She had put the Polaroid in the frame anyway, and she had written in small letters on a card beneath it, "If you are reading this, then the house found you the way it was built to. You are welcome here." Judge lived to be 14 years old. He is buried under the walnut trees, 30 feet from the well. On a Wednesday in late September, 5 years after the afternoon she had first driven up the ruts of the driveway, with $340 in a sandwich bag and a St. Jude medal she had almost tucked into her shirt, Elena Rossi stood in the pantry of the Barono house, with a woman named Deborah, who was 31 years old and who had, 6 days earlier, been told by a federal prosecutor in Newark that she did not, in the government's opinion, qualify for protective placement. Deborah did not know yet where she was. She had been driven up by a public defender at 3 in the morning. She had been given a bed and a meal and a shower and a change of clothes, and had been left to sleep for 14 hours. Now it was mid-morning, and Elena had walked her through the farmhouse, and had brought her last to the pantry. Elena knelt down. She peeled back the linoleum. She lifted the hatch. She showed Deborah the safe. "This is where somebody once left a letter for a stranger," Elena said. "The stranger was me. It's why any of the rest of this is here." Deborah looked at the safe. She did not say anything. Elena reached under her shirt collar. She lifted, over her head, the silver St. Jude medal her grandmother had pressed into her palm on the summer she had turned 14. She held it out. "This isn't from Sal," she said. "This is from my grandmother. It has been at my throat every day of my life since I was 14 years old. My last prosecutor told me to tuck it in. I am going to give it to you, and I am going to ask you to wear it on the outside of your shirt for as long as you are here. When you leave, you give it to whoever comes after you. That is the only rule of the house." Deborah took the medal. She put it around her neck. She let it hang on the outside of her shirt. Elena closed the hatch. She smoothed the linoleum. She stood up. Then the two of them walked out of the pantry together, and Elena went to make coffee because there was a woman in her kitchen who had not, in 6 days, been offered any.